Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. The guitar we're talking about today is the blending of my two least favorite models that Gibson has ever made, the Gibson Sonex and the Gibson Artist series. And for me to say I don't like a certain run of guitars, that means a lot. Now, there's fans of the Artist series and there's people that like the Sonex, but for whatever reason, they just don't jive with me. But this is the blending of those two, and it's called the Sonex Artist. Let's do a little bit of history. Synthesizers were big at this point in time, so Gibson wanted to introduce a guitar that had, similar electronics in them. Not necessarily a synth guitar, those things do exist too, but just something that had built-in onboard effects, kind of like those K-Effector Les Pauls that we talked about before, but not quite the same. So the research and development team came out with something called the RD, short for research and development. And they decided to put active electronics inside of them, because at this point in time, Gibson was owned by Norlin, and Norlin also owned Moog. And Bob Moog actually designed the electronics for these guitars shortly before he left his own company. So of that initial run in 1977, the ones that had the active electronics were the RD Artist and the RD Artist Bass. It had compression, brightness, and expansion controls, as well as bass and treble cuts and boosts. But then there was also the RD Custom, that just had the brightness switch to it. But those models really did not sell that well at first. They're starting to become popular now, but Gibson just thought, maybe this new RD shape isn't working out, so they threw them on traditional models, the Les Paul and the ES335. But they redesigned everything so it was a little bit easier to understand. You have 3 switches on the front like this one, and then you have your bass and treble cuts right here. And if you're a casual fan of Gibson, you probably ran into these things at some point in time in your searches and just thought, yeah, there's 3 models within the Artist lineup. But that's not true. After the Les Paul and 335 also failed, that's when they kind of had to do what I call use-up parts guitars. They had all these extra electronics laying around that they didn't want to just throw away, so that's when things like the Sonex Artist was birthed, the Firebird 2 Artist, the SGR1 Artist. And as far as I'm aware at this point in time, I think those are the only 8 series of guitars that got these active electronics. The Sonex Artist that we're talking about today used up the Les Paul and ES335 Artist boards, because look, it's pretty much the same layout right here. But the Firebird 2 Artist only had compression and expansion, and the SGR1 only had the brightness switch. To the best of my knowledge, that's correct. I might have a few things wrong because I haven't necessarily owned each and every one of these, and it can be hard to get good information online. There was also something called the Howard Roberts Artist, but that does not belong within this family. It didn't have extra electronics or anything like this. So within this setup, this is your bass control. It's got a little pot that goes from 0 to 5 and then to -5. Is essentially the easiest way to word it. When you turn them, there's actually a little notch where it stops at 0, so you know if you're adding or subtracting from the bass, adding or subtracting from the treble. Then this guy is your master volume. This, to the best of my knowledge, is your pickup switch. This is your bright switch, this is your expander, and this is your compressor. That's a lot of stuff to have on a guitar. And what ends up happening is there's like 1 or 2 really good tones out of these guitars, and then there's a million that just sound awful. These are ridiculously bright guitars. So if that's your style of tone, you might like these things. But for the most part, not a lot of people like the Artist series. They just like what they represent historically. And that's where I fall on these things. I appreciate them historically, but no, I would not personally own one of these if I was a gigging musician. So now that we understand the Artist lineup, now we have to talk about the Sonex. The Sonex was a dirt cheap guitar. It was basically the studio before the studio, but even a lower grade guitar than a studio of today. And it essentially took over for the S1 and the Marauder. I like those 2 guitars, but I'm not a big fan of the Sonex. They have a resin wood body with a bolt-on neck, so essentially they have a wooden core to them, and then they just have resin that kind of makes up the rest of them. And on top of that, they have this giant pickguard that just covers them. They're good for about $300 to $400, but once you pay any more than that, no. They're not very good guitars, but decent modding platforms. But there were 4 iterations of the Sonex. So there's the Sonex 180 Deluxe, which is the lowest end one. It has the rosewood fretboard and velvet brick pickups. But then you can step up to the Standard, which has dirty fingers pickups, as well as the Custom. But in 1981, that's when this guy was birthed, the Sonex Artist. It took the place of the Standard within the lineup. But what changed with these is it is now a set neck construction guitar. It's very similar to one called the GGC 700, except for now we have the Moog electronics inside of it as well. But you still have that kind of goofy looking Gibson logo on these guys. Oh, and just in case you missed it, you don't have that giant pickguard covering the top, so it looks kind of like a DePaul at this point. And you get an ebony fretboard. But a regular Sonex, you can find them in white, you can find them in ebony, which is the most common. There's a few rare silver ones out there, Sunburst, Candy Apple Red, Silverburst. So to learn a little bit more about this one, let's go ahead and throw it on the workbench and take a look at its individual parts. Inside the Sonex Artist. This is probably the only one you'll ever see the insides of. So this is kind of interesting. You can tell that the covers have been off and on because the solder work is kind of crappy. But you can see that it has the typical patent number that we're used to seeing in this era, and you actually have the Tim Shaw date stamps on it. It's kind of hard to see, but it is present on both of them. But notice the type of wiring that comes out of these. That's something you'll find on pretty much all these Artist series models. It's not the typical braided shielding wire. But now inside the pickup cavity, you can see it's short neck tenon, and you can kind of see how this body was made. Usually on a Sonex you can't see inside of them because everything's been painted over black. But you can see that rosin wood feature right here. Then you find the wooden core right here. And I don't think it's drilled down far enough to see the other rosin part. So it's basically just a wooden core surrounded by something to form the Les Paul body shape. But that's the other thing about this whole shape. It's kind of the Paul-esque. You see how you got this little comfort carve right here? But it doesn't have the one on the back. So it's only like half the design of a the Paul. And nothing too fancy in here. But here's a pretty good shot of that wooden core again. Notice the difference in color. The other unique thing about this guitar is it has all of the really shortly lived 80s parts, except for the flip-out winding tuners. This is the 9-point adjustable bridge, developed by Rendell Wall. You can check out this video for a little bit more information on them. But essentially, I mean, if you find a bridge that looks goofy and somebody's doing this, well, you know it's one of these things. Because since it has multiple locations that it can be placed in, it can kind of help you get your intonation right, and it could also be used for a left-handed model or a right-handed model guitar. These did not last very long. The tailpiece is another Rendell Wall creation. This is a TP6 fine-tuning tailpiece. You can still buy these brand new today. They don't use them that often, but they mainly use these on high-end guitars of the day. Similar to like a Floyd Rose, it's a fine tuner system. Personally, I don't find them very useful, but I think they look really cool. Now, I'm sure somebody's already left this comment. This guitar must have been refinished. Look how terribly orange peely it is. Well, check out this video for more information on that, but Candy Apple Red is one of those infamous finishes along with Gold Burst that Gibson just could not get right. It'll always have this orange peely effect to it on the early ones. Lots of these were refinished under warranty for that reason, so finding one with the original finish still is kind of cool. There's actually 2 different versions of Candy Apple Red. There's red over silver and red over gold. Now this looks like red over silver to me, because the over gold kind of has a darker tone to it. But here we have our Moog stuff: bright, expansion, compression. When they're this way, they're on. When they're up, they're off. And then this thing confuses me because normally you would have a toggle switch to switch between the pickups, right? I believe this is acting as a pickup selector, but it still sounds like the pickups are always on, so I could be wrong about that. But when it's up, it sounds like you're in a neck position. When it's in the middle, it kind of sounds like you're in a middle, and bridge, just your bridge. I was getting lots of scratchiness in the pots, so I took everything out to give it a good cleaning. So that's why I have these off now. But here's a good close look at these special knobs. So if you ever find a knob that goes from 0 to 5 and 0 to 5, you know it belonged on an Artist model at one point in time. So you got 2 of these for your bass and treble control, and then just a regular one that goes to 10 for your master volume. Another nice little feature on here is an ebony fretboard with mother of pearl dots. I mean, these things, they look pretty cool. When I got the guitar, the frets were like all rusted over and green. You could tell this guitar wasn't used that much. But now it's all cleaned up, polished, shined. It's looking good now. Just very minimal fret wear on this one. The face of the headstock, the truss rod cover reads Sonex Artist. It's kind of aged a very dark hue, but your truss rod's in great shape. And you've got that weird The Gibson Guitar Company USA logo. It's kind of an acquired taste. But if you catch it in the light just right, you can tell it is a 3-piece neck. And you can find both maple and mahogany, but judging by this exposed area, I'm going to say it's a 3-piece mahogany neck. That'd be my best guess. Neck specs 1.68 inches for the nut width, 2.03 at the 12th. First fret neck depth 0.84. By the 12th, wow, 1.05. It's a rather rounded neck, but I didn't think it'd feel that big. Wow. And we've got a 24 3/4 inch scale. If you're more of a Fender guy and you like these Moog electronics, the original RDs are actually 25.5. I think it was around 1979 when they switched them to the shorter scale. And now for the fun part. The back. So they have this huge control cavity, but it's actually 2 separate plates. You've got the main one that covers over the Moog boards, and then you have this one that's just for quick and easy access of changing your battery. Now, one difference between the Les Paul Artist and this one is the Les Paul, these aren't actually drilled into the wood. They actually have like a metal insert. So instead of being a pokey screw, it's actually kind of sawed off. That's just a small thing I noticed. So this board controls your bass and treble cuts and boosts. So if you ever need to see under one of these, those are the only 2 pots you have to undo. I learned that the hard way. I undid these 2 anyways. But unless you take those out, you can't actually see the circuit board here. But you can see the labelings here. It says bass and treble. And this is the other one that controls the compression, expansion, and brightness switches. And when you lift that up here, you can see those 3 tiny toggle switches that sleep right under it. Now, unfortunately, the expander on this one, it kind of cuts in and out a little bit. Like, you can still get the effect, but it kind of fades out and then fades back in. I tested this battery, it's almost new, so I'm guessing that you just need to clean this Moog board up a little bit. If I had some isopropyl alcohol, I would do the same thing, kind of get some of the dirt and grime off of it, and I bet it would go back to being 100% functional, but I do want you to know about that. And honestly, that could just be due to a capacitor that needs replaced. Because on that effector Les Paul, somebody said that mine needed replaced on that last one. And inside here, these things are wrapped up in this foam. I'm not sure if that was originally like that or not, but hey, that's how it is in this one. And I say that because the soldering looks exceptionally amateur hour on this pot. But that's the bulk majority of this guitar right there. You've got your output jack on the side, and you have the rare posi-lock strap buttons. Very shortly lived Gibson 80s part here. I mean, these things will sell between like 80 to 120 bucks a set. Well, here you can see the full extent of this orange peely finish, and something got stuck to this guitar at some point in time. It's just like blended in within the finish. But moving on to the neck here, you've got some of that roughness to the finish right here, but then mysteriously, it's smooth within the middle of the neck. So I don't know if somebody just playing this naturally smoothed it out, but then you get the roughness kind of starting right here again. So I guess that's a nice little feature there, because usually on these orange peeled out finishes, the finish will start to flake off the neck, especially along the edges. So having one that's still intact is very nice. But back here, you just have a set of cheapy tuners. Unfortunately, not the flip-out winders. And you've got your serial number right here, which dates it to late 1981, so a first-year model. And the Made in USA stamp is there. It's just really hard to see. I take the ohm readings for these pickups and stuff, but I can't make it give me a reading that actually makes any sense to me, despite whatever knobs I flip. It's always around this 130 on the 200K ohm setting, so I don't know what's going on. But I can tell you it weighs 9 pounds 3 ounces. So let's go ahead and sit down with this one and run through its tones. Alright, let's try to make some sense out of this. I labeled it to try to make it easier for you guys. So you got brightness, expander, compressor, you've got your bass boost and cut as well as your treble boost cut, your pickup selector switch right here, and then this is just your master volume. Now, this guitar can also not only get super bright, but it will also get ridiculously loud. So I'm leaving the master volume at 7 for this whole demo. So right now, this is just the neck pickup with everything equaled out at 0 and nothing on. You can still hear it has that certain active brightness to it. So now we'll try the middle position. Now just the bridge. So those are essentially your basic tones here. And then from there, you can add and cut bass, add and cut treble. So now I'm just gonna use the neck pickup and kind of roll around with these knobs so you guys get an idea of what's going on here. So I always thought that would be good for like jazzy tones. Because you're already on your neck pickup, now you're boosting the bass. So that's one of the tones I do like out of this thing. Now let's mess around with the treble. And we'll do that with the bridge pickup. So bright. Which I guess you might be able to use it somehow. Then you could get crazy. So we've got the treble boosted. We can just take all the bass off and yeah. Just boost everything. That's just the basic stuff right here. It's usable if you tame it to whatever songs you're trying to go for. Now we can get into the scary stuff. So, remember how we could have the bridge pickup and make it ridiculously bright and just cut the bass? If you thought this was bright, wait till you add the brightness switch. It's so bright you get this weird buzz when you really hammer in on it. Obviously, that's not the intended use. So here's how it is when it's just the bright switch, none of that other stuff. Much more usable. It kind of gets into single coil territory a little bit. And that was on the bridge pickup, now on the neck pickup. Yeah, so think of that like the Stratocaster switch. Now, the expander is actually, I think, one of my favorite ones on this guitar. I'm not quite sure what it's really doing. I like it when you add all the bass to it and cut all the treble. This is what I think is a really nice jazzy tone. Now the last one is compression. This is the one that makes your guitar get really loud. Now Now, if you're feeling particularly dangerous on any given day, you could turn everything on, technically, because it's not just one or the other. You can have multiple ones running. You could turn the treble all the way up. You could turn the bass all the way down. You could select your bridge pickup and have it on full blast. The worst sound you're ever about to hear on a guitar is this. So I hope that gives you some sort of idea what you can get out of these artist guitars. There's a bunch of usable sounds in here, but there's also a lot of garbage. You gotta really dial in what you super want out of these things. So even though you have all these options, you're not gonna want to use all of them. I mean, can you imagine having distortion on with all this? Oh, goodness. On a guitar like this, I really have no idea what to play, so I hope that gives you an idea of how these things sound. So now that we know all about the Sonex Artist, what are my final thoughts on it now that I've seen everything and I've played it? Yeah, I can't recommend this guitar. I just do not like the tones that come out of this thing. As I said earlier, there's a few select really good tones, so it's kind of fun in that aspect, but I could not see somebody seriously using this guitar as their only guitar. But I appreciate these from a historical standpoint because they're so rare. Most of you probably hadn't even heard of a Sonex Artist before today. But all things aside, as far as the Sonex lineup goes, it's one of my favorite ones because, you know, we've got the set neck, you don't have the big pickguard on it. It looks like a standard Les Paul. So I could definitely see somebody picking one of these up, gutting it, and just using it as a regular Les Paul because it doesn't necessarily have any of those really quirky specs to it anymore. So should you buy this one? I guess that depends. Are you a collector of quirky guitars like I am? Then in that case, yes, get one. But otherwise, yeah, just pass on the artist models. They're not my favorite, but I can understand them. Now that my review's done, let's go ahead and go over the condition in case you're interested in being the next owner of this one. All things considered, this thing's not in that bad of shape for such a rare guitar. Usually cheap, underappreciated guitars like these get super beat up, but for the most part, I would say this one displays well. I mean, you've got scratches on the face of the headstock. There is some wear and tear along the edges that we'll go over, especially some dinged-in corners of the headstock here. But the nut's in good shape, the frets show very minimal wear. I cleaned the fretboard up, you just have minor wear to that. So everything's looking good here. And it plays well, but once you get to the body, again, it's candy apple red. It's just the early ones just look garbage on these guitars. But that's part of the charm. I kinda like these orange peely finishes because they're a part of history. But as you can see as we run the light over it, there's some light impressions, nicks and dings, scratches. And again, your expander kind of has that fading in and out problem, probably a capacitor, maybe you can just clean it out. Sometimes the output jack's a little bit funny, but I used some contact spray and the guitar actually became usable again. You've got some wear to the chrome covered pickups. You've got those nice rare 80s parts on this guitar too. That's the other thing that keeps this guitar valuable is all the parts. In my for sale listing, that's what I'm going to do. I'm basically just going to list this for my part out price because in my opinion, that's what this thing's worth, right? So back of the headstock here, you do have some wood exposed. It was definitely leaned up against something, got some dings, but thankfully no breaks, cracks, or repairs. This was also on a bad stand. It burnt through the nitro finish. You can see all the way through to the wood there on both sides. But thankfully, the neck is in good shape. As we were talking about on the workbench, usually these orange peeled finishes, you lose your finish on your neck, so that's in great shape. So if you wanted to put this in like a circular rotating display, I think this thing would still look pretty good because all your finish is everywhere still. That's the only one boo-boo is whatever caused this. It's kind of upsetting that that didn't come off because that's the only thing that, you know, keeps it from looking mint condition from far away. But you've got scratches, you've got nicks and dings. It's definitely a player's grade version of one of these, but still collectible at the same time. And besides the headstock and that weird area on the back, there's no like giant gouges out of this thing. So that's kind of what convinced me to purchase this one, because like, man, whenever else are you gonna see a Sonex Artist out there? They do not show up very often. So let's go ahead and take a look under Blacklight. That's a beautiful glower right here. You can tell it hasn't been played all that much. Doesn't have a bunch of sweat absorption. You can see a little bit right here. But everything's looking good on the front. Your knobs are glowing the way I would expect to see. Moving up the fretboard, even your dot inlays glow a little bit. Face of the headstock, beautiful. But it looks like maybe there were some stickers on it that made it age a little bit differently. It's kind of hard to make out what that might have been, but back of the headstock, here you can see those worn through areas I was talking about. Nothing too crazy. And then the stand rash marks. So I guess you don't have to worry about what stand you put this one on, but here's that neck, just to show you there's no broken areas. Nice. Then the back. That does glow like it's something stuck on it, so maybe somebody put like a set list back here, I don't know. That is lost to history, but everything else, this is a beautifully glowing example. Looks like maybe a little bit of stand rash down here too. So it passes and looks great. What's even better yet is this thing actually comes with a chainsaw case, Generation 2. So you've got 3 plastic latches, one here, and unfortunately the back one has been broken off. You've got some wear and tear to your handle. I hate it when it starts to get like that. But for the most part, where you're actually holding it, you still have the good cushioning left. A good trick if you don't want that to continue to deteriorate, just wrap it in some electrical tape or whatever is comfortable to you, and that'll prevent that from spreading. So lots of scratches, nicks, and dings, but these are the best cases Gibson has ever made. The case no longer supports its lid. I mean, it kind of flops over. It's got a little bit of support left, but you get the idea. Your hinges are kind of rusted here. But still good cushioning in it. Everything's looking good here. You still have this little thing, but nothing inside. So, I mean, even this case, probably still worth, I would say, at least $150. And it would be $250 if it wasn't for the broken latch. If you think you might be interested in being the next owner of this Gibson Sonex Artist, you can check out that link in the description, which will take you to the Reverb for sale page. Thank you, Troglodytes, for tuning in today. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you tomorrow on the next one. Take care.